Sports, Awesemo.com. Chris Randone here, Fast Eddie Fear. Eddie, what's going on, man? You ready for this 6-game slate?
I'm excited. I was happy to miss yesterday, which was the land of chalk harden and insane value, and today is getting a little more exciting, but a bit less frantic leading up to lock. Some good news broke already, sadly a little earlier than we'd like it to. I was kind of down on Trae Young, and then they came out with his minutes will be limited to around 30. That's going to knock him down a peg. I think a lot of people would have overreacted to the Jabari Parker instead of John Collins news, which I think is probably nominal, if not a slight negative for Trae Young, but that'll knock his ownership down from where it would have been, and I would have preferred either Kemba or Brogdon in that spot in price. And I was a big fan of Alex Len, who was, questionable, and there was lots of other value, so he was going to go, 7-8% owned. That'll bounce a little bit now, but we got some news coming, but I'm excited to be on the air with you for the first time, my man.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a pleasure. And speaking about last night, it was almost like we knew where to go with the value. We weren't worried about minutes being played with Brown and Kennard. Tonight, however, a little bit of a different story. I agree. The news that came out, I wish maybe a little bit before lock instead of maybe an hour and 10 minutes before lock. But with Trae Young, do you think people now will jump off of him, given that he's going to be on a limit restriction? And I mean, this could be somewhat of a game where maybe San Antonio does end up being in a blowout, or if he does drop in ownership, do you stay with him and ride that coattail?
Yeah, that's I interestingly enough, the ownership is going to fall, and the question is how far do we think that ownership falls? It's different site by site, where the FanDuel price is directly aligned with a couple other guys I mentioned in Kemba and in Brogdon, who is pretty clearly the tops of the three in any raw projection sense for me now, with no Sabonis, no Turner. A lot of the guys who will do the filling in there, unlike, say, Jabari Parker, will be a little more reticent to throw up a giant bucket of shots. So, and Brogdon, better peripheral contributor than either of those other guys in general, just has been doing and is going to continue to do a lot for this team. And I like the matchup quite a bit. So, pretty big fan of Broggy pants over those guys now. But I will see when our last ownership update came in, because certainly it'll be interesting to see what Trae Young gets down to. I think he was going to be well more than I'd like, but at this point, I think there's a real chance that I don't know about craters, but I think it comes down quite a bit. As we mentioned, there's just some other places to look, and again, you have the couple Lakers in a very strong matchup as predominant spend-up options, whose raw points per dollar already felt a little bit better, but there's certainly, even in 30 minutes, you can get 60 out of Trae Young in a spot like this. So let me take a look at
I think 2 hours ago, Trae Young 37.7% on FanDuel, and then I think he was at 21.9% on DraftKings. So now we haven't got an update yet, so still 2 hours ago. But before we go into these 6 games, guys, let's go ahead and thank our sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. If you guys haven't signed up there yet, they do basketball tournaments as well. For those of you who don't know, they do the 25K baller, which I think is closed now. I think registration filled up, but 5K to first place. But if you sign up and you haven't signed up yet, if you use the promo code live before lock, you get $30 in Yahoo Sports rewards points. And that can get you 3 entries into any $10 tournament, either the baller for NBA or the NFL baller as well. So if you haven't used Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports yet, check them out. And don't forget to use the promo code live before lock. So we got 6 games, Eddie. The first one, Pacers at Hornets. Right now, Indiana, the line is 3.5, over under 212. We heard Lofty and Adam talk about a few guys in this game, and some of them from the guard position of the Pacers, and some revenge narratives as well. But let's break this down and really let us know where we should go in this game.
Yeah, so if we're going to start with... Sorry, are we talking about the Pacers and the Hornets? I was reading a pile of messages that came in. You introed a game, and I'm not sure which one it was.
Yeah, Pacers Hornets is the first game. Over under 212, Eddie, and then Indianapolis 3.5 point favorites right now.
Yeah, not a ton to do with just taking a look at the slate in general first, the over-unders, and even the lines. Almost every game we have tonight is somewhere between 2.5 and a 7-point game. Nothing really actionable there. It's worth noting that I think it's Orlando and OKC have a pretty pitiful over-under total of just a hair over 200. Everything else in sort of the same reasonable area of pace. Atlanta and San Antonio, the fastest. Again, I like to caution against overvaluing terms like the fastest and understanding the difference between, ordinal value versus the actual differential and things. Like I had someone say to me today, I like the Hornets here. They're actually in a pace-up spot against the Pacers. Like someone said that. And I think right now the Pacers are 16th in the NBA in pace. It's 16th or 17th. And the Hornets are like 24th. And the difference between them is like 0.6. There's this massive band of teams through what is, by the way, an incredibly small sample size. There's this big old band of teams that is ranked between somewhere around like 14th and 25th that are basically identical. Certainly not any actionable difference between them, but people are getting on that. And also the Pacers, come to think of it, are actually probably lower than they should be because of the schedule they've had so far. They've played 5 or 6 games, and they've played Detroit twice and Cleveland twice. That's going to knock you the heck down. So the Pacers will actually end up around 8 to 10 probably, but just cautioning since you brought up the game environment. I'd heard a lot of stuff today like, I like the pace-up spot for the Hornets. That's largely not present. So it's... Anyhow, yeah, the game in general. Did we get Doug McDermott news? I hadn't seen that yet, but obviously the big news for this team is that Sabonis and Turner are both going to be out. Goga will continue to start at center. Jakar Sampson will come in again at the 4. Updated the rankings and put Sampson back in because I really wasn't terribly interested in him in the event that even one of the other 2 guys was in, and I did think Sabonis was going to suit up for this. Turns out he's not going to. The guys I would start talking about here would be Goga and Malcolm Brogdon. Brogdon's been great for this team, and again, he was never really appreciated in his Bucks time. Managed to get in the 50-40-90 club, which is a pretty exclusive club to get in, shooting 50% from the field, 40% from 3, and 90% from the stripe. There's like 8 people in it or something. Has always been really good on both ends of the court. I mean, I don't know if he'll get to the ceiling Kawhi is at, but he's undergoing that sort of renaissance based on environment. And it is pretty clearly my favorite at this point over him or who I like a little bit more than Kemba, who just from a raw projection standpoint, I would like a good bit more than Trae Young if you were comparing those 3 guys, which people have asked me about at the top a number of times today. I like Goga a lot. Now, a lot of this is going to come down to ownership. I was pretty sure Alex Len was going to start and play today, and we were going to get him pretty cheap. The matchup, not brilliant for him against the Spurs. There's obviously a number of ways that can go wrong. He'll be tasked with Aldridge a lot, but he's done reasonably well in that environment in the past. He's started at least a couple games I can recall against LaMarcus Aldridge in the past and done not so badly that they needed to yank him out. It's not an easy spot for him or anyone, but he covers the ground pretty well. And, I had what his ownership was going to be previous to that news and the new existence of Goga. I was going to be happier going there than a couple other ownership spots. I'm looking to see if we have an ownership update again. We do not, I don't think. Yes, we do. There we go.
Yeah, we just got one.
All right, let's see what we got. So we have Goga at 22% and Len at 9.6. Yeah, I'd be much happier playing Alex on at this point. I have them projected actually pretty closely. Both of them are dealing with sort of an inherent minutes limit and a fair bit of uncertainty. Both of them deal with pretty significant foul trouble. I'm a little more concerned for Goga. I would say Len has actually a slightly better game environment. If he's going to be under half owned, I would try to come up with I think it's $100 difference on DK. On FanDuel, I think you're saving $1,000 going to Alex Len. They bumped Goga already all the way up to, I think, 5.3. Alex Len sitting at 4.3, I think. I just rather play Len there, and I imagine the ownership will be much more similar based on that differential there. But the absence of both Turner and Sabonis, their time being taken by, TJ Leaf, especially if Dougie McBuckets is out, which I guess I'm going to go look again and see if randomly we got that news. But, Yeah,
I wanna ask you about Goga
sure.
because on DraftKings, I mean, I think he is definitely appropriately priced for a value play at
Sure.
4K, but on FanDuel, it makes it a little bit more difficult because you mentioned it that they already adjusted his price to 5,300 at center, and so I guess what I want to ask you is I think it's probably when it comes to value a no brainer on DraftKings, but at center, given where it's at right now, we have Jokic obviously as the best play at the center position, but also the highest owned at 28.1. So if you wanted to be someone that, let's just say, wanted to pivot and pay down at center, would Goga be the center that you would pay down for in this spot?
I mean, I would play Alex Len pretty massively for $1,000 less at this point. Uh, that being said, the matchup is not superb again for Goga. Cody Zeller is always been a very solid defender. Gets in the right places at the right times. Doesn't tend to give up massive games, with a couple rare exceptions. So, I think Goga is fine just because center on FanDuel is a bit of a nightmare. I mean, you have Jokic at 9.2, which is just objectively too cheap for him. Not a great spot for him. And obviously he's in the midst of one of his doldrums where he's seems disinterested or certainly isn't getting a massive usage on the ball. Tristan Thompson all the way up to 8.4. It's a little more than you want to pay for Tristan Thompson. But again, the matchup for him and Kevin Love doesn't feel that bad against a Boston team, which is going very solid defensively, but most bereft of qualified personnel at those front court positions. 7K is a little more than I want to play for Wendell Carter, especially against the Lakers, which is a not fast, not great matchup. Cody Zeller, 7K. I probably would rather go there than Goga in any cashy environment. Dwight Howard, 6'2". That's too much for a guy who we really don't know how much time we're going to get out of him. You might get 20-something minutes. You might get in the mid-teens for any number of reasons. Myers Leonard, they boosted his price. So center's bad. So, in a tournament or in cash, if I'm paying down, I would play Alex Len for $4,300. Past that, other acceptable sort of tournament pivots would be JaVale McGee at $3,800 against the Bulls. That can certainly get there. That can get there in 14 minutes. He can get 32 fantasy points. It wouldn't shock me whatsoever in that matchup. Cody Zeller, who we've mentioned. Tristan Thompson is an almost cashy play. I don't love him, but the minutes have been fairly massive, and the matchup is actually pretty solid for me. So 8,400, I'm certainly closing out the upside a little bit. And, Vucevic against some somewhat injured center is kind of appealing. Both Steven Adams and Nerlens Noel not 100%.
What's interesting about this matchup for the center position is both of these teams defensively, when it comes to the center position, give up. They're both in the top 5 of giving up the most fantasy points allowed to that given position.
Yep.
So, I mean, if you're looking at a high upside as far as where are their weak defenders or where are they weak against, scoring opportunities for center positions, this definitely could be a game. But outside of the center position, there's been a lot of talk about the guards we've seen all day through the Slack chat and through all the shows, with Brogdon and being kind of in the same price point as Kemba Walker, the same price point as Trae Young. So with Sabonis off the court, obviously there has to be more scoring to the guards. And I think Brogdon and Lamb are definitely in play here. I think not only does their usage go up, but I think they're going to have to rely on these two the most to be able to have a chance at winning this game. So what about the guard play here for the Indiana side? And I guess we can go to the Bobcat side as well, Charlotte side as well, because you have Bacon, which seems to be somewhat of a good value play tonight, and then also Terry Rozier. So let's break down this guard play real quick.
Yeah, I do want to say when you talk about giving up a lot of points to center, I would expect those numbers to both regress towards the middle. Those are to some degree matchup based. You had the Hornets absolutely got ripped by Karl Anthony Towns for a game, and as I mentioned, the Pacers have played Andre Drummond twice. So small sample size of 5 or 6 games, I think are pushing that a little more extreme than that will end up after some more of a game sample. Yeah, like I said, Brogdon was perfectly reasonably priced, especially on DraftKings. Anyway, $8,200 is still a little bit too cheap if you just game log it, which I haven't done. But he's basically banging out what you would expect to be somewhere in that 40-45 range just about every game. And this is a plus matchup with, I think, the ceiling reattached pretty firmly there. So You can certainly make similar arguments for Trae Young without John Collins, although I think that's a little bit faulty. And this is actually a Spurs team with some really quality backcourt defenders. You can talk about Kemba without Jaylen Brown and against another team that's fairly bereft of decent defenders. But I do think Brogdon is the most advantaged in just about every way here. Yeah, he had 36 in the last game, which was by far his worst game of the year. The other 5 games, he had 46, 58, 47, 55, and 46. I can't imagine that we think he's going to do worse than that. So just, looking at just gross averages. And he was expected to be popular all day and should have been. He's just still a little bit too cheap there. And we have him as the most owned of these guys. Now, we have him at 30, Kemba at 25, and Trae Young appropriately less, which he should be, and Trae Young at 15. I would still prefer Brogdon as far as my shares. I would still want to be over there on Brogdon, a little bit under there on Kemba, and I think a little bit under on Trae Young. There's just enough ways that goes badly. Both this Atlanta team and Miami today, now with everyone healthy, are going to be, there's some real rotational questions that I don't think anyone can know.
2 guys I want to talk real quick before we go into the next game at the forward position. One is Jakar Sampson. He's the bare minimum on DraftKings. And I think the question here is can we plug him in cash, and is he GBP viable? In my opinion, I think point per dollar wise, I don't think so. I just don't think he can get there. Now, I could be wrong, but for what I have him at right now, I still have him projected at 18, 19 minutes, and point per dollar, I just don't see it. And the other guy, after breakdown Jakar, is TJ Warren. I think TJ Warren stock here goes up a little bit. He's going to be on the court. He's going to play his 34, 35 minutes. A lot of defensive opportunities with him as well. And we all know he can shoot. So I think Sabonis being out, I think does give him a bump as well. And so these 2 guys, is there any type of in play for either Jakar or Warren?
Yeah, I have Jakar Sampson at 23 minutes, which is a little bit more, but still not someone I'm interested. Like, if he's probably the best flat $3,000 player on DraftKings, and he's probably even a little better on FanDuel because he's a small forward, where he's 3,500. He's also the minimum there. So, should you end up on him, the ceiling for minutes is obviously there. They're well understaffed. He could be playing well, and he could end up with 29 minutes. Wouldn't shock me whatsoever, to be honest. And could have, a marginal game of a fantasy point a minute, and poof, he was an excellent piece of value. I think he got rated as, I'm actually not certain where I rated. I believe I rated him as a BA. He might have ended up a BB, but not a great fantasy producer over the course of his career. Somewhere around 0.7 fantasy points per minute. Wouldn't expect a lot better here. Sort of suffers from the same thing as the other guy you mentioned, TJ Warren, which is that he's just not, whenever you get on a new basketball team, and I've played basketball nigh on 30 years, there's just that guys look for other guys type thing, and it's overly simplistic, but just hasn't been that much involved really on either end of the court, hasn't been getting the key defensive assignments. So, the price hasn't got, I'd be really interested in $5,000 TJ Warren. I still think it's very interesting in GPPs because, again, these shots are actually going to have to go somewhere. But at their prices, I would rather go to the other person you alluded to who I didn't give a long take on, which is Lamb, who's been excellent basically every game this year but one, still priced around $6K. I do think this opens up a big ceiling for him. So certainly if I'm building a lineup where I get away from Brogdon, Jeremy Lamb would be the first person I look for there. I'm fine if you end up on some Jakar Sampson. Certainly not a priority for me. Would rather run it out there at the minimum on FanDuel.
Is Lamb okay on both sites? I know on DK he's got the 61 price tag, but on FanDuel a little bit more. He's 7,300. So is it okay for a FanDuel play as well?
It's obviously fine in tournaments. I mean, he has gotten near, if I don't believe, gotten to 40 fantasy points this year. I'll click on his name. I could be, he had 43 2 games ago. So he was 37, 43, 34, and in the first game he had only 20 fantasy points. But his last 3 games he's played perfectly tolerable. So in average matchups with some combination of 1 or 2 or 0 of the bigs there over the last 3 games, he's averaged 38 with a high of 43 already. So clearly that's a number he can get on top of. And again, also shooting guard on FanDuel is a little less egregiously priced. They really bumped the cap on Jimmy Butler. There's more than you really want to pay for him there. There's some spend down options that are interesting. And in Evan Fournier, who's been Mr. Consistency this year, he's got 22 to 27 fantasy points every game. So, you can click that button. Clarkson, a couple Porter minutes now floating around as opposed to the Dellavedova minutes he's been getting. So that's a number you can hit. Bembry, there's still no Evan Turner for this team, so he should get still some backup, handling duty. Might get more minutes at other positions. Again, not sure exactly how that time shakes out. Don't really want to go the Duncan Robinson way anymore, but Danny Green's minutes should be more solid. So there are some somewhat interesting shooting guard options, but as you get up towards the top, Jeremy Lamb is not ideally priced, as you mentioned, 73 versus 61, but it's certainly fine to go to. I would probably rather click Zach LaVine's name in that range by a hair, but yeah.
All right, next game, Celtics Cavs, 215.5. Boston 6.5 point favorites right now. Nothing significant here outside of the Jaylen Brown news being out. Let's talk about the Celtics first and then go into the Cavs.
Sure. Okay. I think there's a number of guys you can be interested in here. On FanDuel, Daniel Tice deserves a specific mention. It'll be interesting to see how low his ownership gets knocked with the existence of Jabari Parker. I think the 2-second look at power forward on FanDuel really makes you want to play going home Anthony Davis and Jabari Parker in those two positions. But Daniel Tice is another guy at 4,200 there. I'd have a lot of interest in. When you're at $600 legit cheaper for a value guy on FanDuel than DraftKings, that is noticeable of and by itself, and will usually portend some sort of strong chance there. Tatum, the price has come up a little bit. I'm not as excited in the matchup for him. So I do think the ceiling's there. He's been taking the shots this year. His usage has been up. Matchup, not a fast one, but certainly one he could take advantage in. I would generally rather pay the Kevin Love price tag. I would rather play, obviously, the two chalky guys, I'm sure, that I just referred to. But nothing wrong with whatever amount of Jason Tatum you end up with in tournaments. On both sites, I have Gordon Hayward about evenly projected with him, and that you're getting the discount on Hayward, but it's about proportional to what I'd expect out of the production. And Marcus Smart, really worth talking about, especially on FanDuel, where he's priced even, I think, $100 better apples to apples. But certainly apples to oranges, a much better deal. The FanDuel scoring also plays better into his ability to pick up an upside with a guy who can get a number of steals, which this is really a matchup that could pretend that for him. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the front court. You now have center time still divided probably three ways between each of the Williams, with Robert Williams being back. I have him projected for 11 minutes, but anywhere between 6 and 18 wouldn't shock me. Grant Williams, again, can play a couple positions. It depends how big they go here against a team that's very large up front. Maybe you get more Bob time, less Grant time. Maybe the team in general goes bigger and the rotations change a little bit that way. But Tice on FanDuel, I'm pretty interested in. Everywhere else, these would be guys that I don't have a problem splashing in, but none priorities for me. And again, Kemba, a just fine play. In the past, Colin Sexton actually did fairly well against him, and not a bad defender, Colin Sexton in general. Offensive issues doing much, but scoring. But defensively, a decent guy. So obviously, there's just a 27 shot attempt ceiling game potential in there for Kemba Walker. I don't have a problem getting to him, but just from a raw projection sense, again, I would rather go with Brogdon.
Well, let's talk about Kemba real quick, because I know you mentioned defensively he's kind of contained against Walker in the past, but he doesn't have the best of defenses. He struggles significantly when it comes to defense. And so I wanted to ask you, given where this is a high upside, I think they're top 3 in giving up the most fantasy points to the point guard position this year so far. Kemba Walker's definitely highly rated where I have him at right now, projection-wise. And so when it comes to, I guess, him and Brogdon, because these guys are $100 difference when it comes to FanDuel, who would you rather go with here, Walker or Brogdon?
I would rather go with Brogdon, especially with those guys out. I had him by, I think, 1.5 or so anyway. That would probably stretch to 2.5 or 3. I'm just a bigger fan. The pace is relevant to me. I would generally, I would rather go with Broggy Pants.
On the other side of the ball, we have two big men in Thompson and Love, who have been playing outstanding together this year. Prices are starting to creep up more and more. And then we also have talk about the small forward position with someone who's been, I guess, coming up in a lot of crunches today and a lot of projections, and that's Larry Nance Jr. I guess we'll break down the big men first here. With their price points, can we go there, or is there just other areas where it's just not worth it to pay their price point?
I don't think I would land on either of them in cash. I can see landing on Tristan just for the minutes, and he has a very solid floor. And I mean, even in tournaments, it's not crazy. Come to think of it, I generally think of Tristan Thompson as a bit more of a cash game play because he just really busts the ceiling off. He can throw you into the 40s, but not a guy who's going to drop 60 fantasy points for you almost ever. As opposed to other guys in that range, you can hope for that kind of outcome, especially in a good matchup. I still like both these guys. They both don't points per dollar and projection end up particularly again in any cashy sense. So it does come down to an ownership question on each of these guys. If we have Kevin Love, where I'm expecting him to be somewhere in the, I don't know, I'll guess he's in the, I'll go like 9%. Let's take a look. Kevin Love. We have 20%.
He's 12.6 on FanDuel.
Okay. Yeah.
And then Tristan's 5.1 on FanDuel.
Yeah. Now Tristan's 8,400 on FanDuel.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel weird to spend that money on Tristan as opposed to, for example, Jokic for $800 more. Like, that feels awkward. And again, if you're playing in tournaments, Jokic puts up 60 fantasy points 15 times a year. Tristan Thompson just doesn't do it. So, I think the thought process there is solid. That being said, I think Jokic just played 6 games this year and had 35 in 5 of them and one very good game or something. So you very possibly, on what is a shorter and more abbreviated slate with, again, a paucity of really nice choices with any kind of upside on FanDuel, on this slate particularly, I think that makes sense. And if he's 5%, yeah, I'd want to have like 10% because he can get me 41, and 41 can be the best center on FanDuel pretty easily. He just needs to beat Jokic.
One guy that I find ever interesting that I kind of would like to pivot from Larry Nance is C.D. Osman. He's been playing a significant amount of time on the court, and for me, at his price point, if he's on the court for 34 to 36 minutes, right, I think that kind of warrants his 4,400 price tag on FanDuel. And so I wanted to ask you, with kind of how this rotation runs, and what I've been seeing kind of in the game flows, is that they kind of rely on him, especially to close out games. And I wanted to ask you, at that price point, could you go with him? And is it somewhat okay if we see ownership high on Nance? Because I'll tell you, with Nance last year, it defensively is where he gets you. Defensively, putting up points, especially on FanDuel, is why we wanted to roster Nance last year. And so this year, though, we haven't seen that yet, and the scoring hasn't been there as well. And so with Osman, I wanted to ask you, is it smart, if we see ownership high on Nance, could we pivot to a 4,400 price point on Osman?
Yeah, I would probably rather play Osman at this point than Nance. I don't really want to play either of these guys. The cookie for either of them is Michael Porter Jr. is out. He, isn't going to play 18 minutes or something. Those minutes have to flow somewhere. In this particular matchup, I do think the two gentlemen we're talking about are the most likely people to benefit from that. I don't think it's a Jordan Clarkson spot necessarily. The issue with Nance, besides just general usage and a somewhat unlikely, dearth of defensive stats, I think he had 2 steals a few games ago, but didn't have one of those big games, is playing a lot away from the basket. Last year we got 4 and 5 Nance a lot. We're not getting a lot of that. If you get 38 minutes of Tristan Thompson and 34 minutes of Kevin Love, we're not getting a ton of Nance down there playing the 4 or even the 5, and that really hurts his ability to produce. So I already would have been pretty, concerned. And again, the specific defensive matchups he's going to see as he moves further away from the basket in this matchup with Boston are going to get a little more difficult. So yeah, if we were looking at 4% Chetty and 24% Larry Nance, I would much rather save money and play Chetty. I would still have Nance produced higher just because of the players they are. I have Chetty somewhere around 19 or 20 fantasy points. I have Nance somewhere around 24, I think, but certainly I would rather save the money and play Chetty, and I think that's an intelligent pivot there.
Our next game, Spurs at Atlanta. San Antonio 5.5 point favorites, over under 220 right now. We kind of spoke about Trae Young. He's going to be limited to 30 minutes. And we talked about, some of these core plays that might be cheap opportunities in Bembry and Cam Reddish. Let's talk about first the Spurs. One guy that seems to be showing up highly for me, which is kind of difficult to figure out if I can, play with this price point, given his minute restriction, is Dejounte Murray. Right now I have him for 24.8 minutes. But the ownership not necessarily there. But this is fairly a good matchup for him. So I wanted to ask you, with Dejounte Murray at this price point, do you think he can still get there?
Obviously can. Yes, he can get there. But I again, I have him for 23 and a half minutes, I think, so I'm even a little more hesitant than you are, although this is an island game for the Spurs, which is relevant for thinking about how they're going to necessarily employ him. The matchup is supreme. He has never played against a Trae Young Hawks team. No, based on their schedules. No, he has never played against a Trae Young Hawks team, and it's a great place to play if you're a point guard. It's like the strip clubs in Atlanta. Playing against Trae Young is the second best thing to do in Atlanta. Derek White is questionable. I don't know if we have Derek White news. I'd like to see Derek White out. That gives me an extra, minute on my projection. That would make me kind of happy. I don't think we have that news in particular yet. I'm looking. I don't see it. So he has shown in much tougher matchups than this one that he can just run out there and be the man and put up 40 fantasy points in 23 minutes. I think he is playing over his head. And I'm a huge DeJounte Murray fan. I've been talking about him for a couple of years, talked about him Summer League and preseason. I'm a big DeJounte Murray fan. I do not think that he will continue to produce 1.7 fantasy points a minute. That being said, he's done it, and it's in the best matchup possible. So having no DeJounte Murray is a risk because, he can put up 50 in 24 minutes against the Hawks very, very easily. I find that an unlikely conclusion. Derek White is in, so there you go. Minor cookie away. Thank you, K-Shep Kilim, who sent me a message there. Don't know how I missed that bit of news. But I would be generally disinclined towards playing him, especially because on DraftKings, I think you end up playing other Spurs frequently. You end up playing, a lot of people are going to play DeRozan, and I would be a pretty big fan of playing LaMarcus Aldridge. So I would be disinclined towards being super exposed to DeJounte Murray. Now, the world, as well as you and I, know that he has been very limited on minutes, and maybe one of these days they raise that limit, without necessarily letting everybody know and just, he's up to 30 now. That wouldn't shock me incredibly. I ranked him as a C in cash and an A in tournaments. I feel that's right, but I can't take him over a $100 more LaMarcus Aldridge. Can't get
and I was going to ask you, I feel like Aldridge is in a great spot right here. And he's rating pretty high, and the ownership's not necessarily there on him. And so at 7,700 on FanDuel, and I believe on DraftKings, he's 6,800. I feel like he's definitely someone who I want to build some lineups around. And what I want to ask you with Aldridge and DeRozan is are these two guys that I guess you're willing to pay for, or would you want to go in other areas in this spot, given that you have Thies, you have Parker, and I mean, obviously there's that question of, do you want to roster Anthony Davis tonight? So if you're not rostering Anthony Davis, are you paying down for Aldridge?
Yeah, I'm a fan of rostering both of them on DraftKings. On FanDuel, I can certainly think you get away from it. I think your best 2 point per dollar options do end up being Jabari Parker and Anthony Davis quite frequently, and the price not as advantageous there, but either third or fourth on that list of power forwards I want to play would end up being a perfectly reasonably priced LaMarcus Aldridge. I like Aldridge well more than DeRozan. DeRozan more directly inhibited by the renaissance that is DeJounte Murray. The matchup I generally like better for Aldridge against this stack of personnel against Jabari Parker, as opposed to the various guys who will be guarding DeMar DeRozan, or against Parker or Len are the two guys who are going to see the most of him in many of their rotations, or Bruno Fernando or whomever you think picks him up at any given point in time. He should be able to get there just a little bit easier than DeRozan, and he's cheaper than DeRozan, so I end up on Aldridge, as does the field well more. I still quite a bit like DeMar DeRozan. We've been talking about these Spurs for a number of shows, and a recurring motif for me over the last 10 days or so has been like, look, these guys didn't all forget how to play basketball, be they Brad Beal or James Harden or whomever, and they're going to hit their games sooner or later. Pick them in the right spots. This is a really good spot, so I'm a huge fan of having LaMarcus Aldridge. I prefer LaMarcus Aldridge to DeMar DeRozan. If I don't have LaMarcus Aldridge, one of the players I'd want most on my team would be DeMar DeRozan.
Of the cheap guys that are probably in consideration, more so on DraftKings, maybe not so much on FanDuel, But we have a few guys. You have Patty Mills, you have Bembry, Cam Reddish. Any of these guys are in consideration of just cheap plug-in plays that you're looking to fit in rosters, maybe for GBPs?
I like a lot of the sort of the plug in there. So obviously, it's setting aside Jabari Parker, who's superlative on FanDuel and only slightly less sexy on DK, but still a certainly fine place to go. I have some degree of affections for a number of guys on this team. Bembry is still in play, though that price is up to 5,300. I'd rather not go there. DeAndre Hunter, 4,400. Not super looking at. I've already spoken about Alex Len at length, but generally I'm a pretty big fan there. Kevin Huerter, they said they've raised his limit to 30 to 35 minutes. That he didn't have a limit last game. He still doesn't have a limit. It's not like without the limit, he was going to play 36 minutes tonight, so I don't even know why they bother saying that. But Kevin Huerter is unlimited at this point, $4,100, and similarly somewhere in the 4K range on FanDuel. Yeah, some interest in that in the fastest game of the night. Cam Reddish, DK. Not super interested. I think the number's 4,900 there. FanDuel, I think it's 42, and he's a small forward. Okay, you have my attention. Like, that's very interesting to me. So, and even a little bit of exposure to Bruno Fernando, who's gonna play 18 minutes of center and might play 27 minutes of center. All you need is some Alex Len foul trouble or re-aggravation of rib injury for that to necessarily work out. So again, I use my rankings as a list of these are the guys in my GPP pool, and I've updated it twice today, and Bruno Fernando is in there. He's actually in there as a CB at $3,200. He's not going to be incredibly owned, and there's a number of ways he can get there. There's a few guys on both sides of the ball who can get there. Derek White is in, so that got sort of some of what would have been the interesting Spurs value. I actually probably thought you would have gotten like 21 minutes of Marco Bellinelli at 3K. I'd have been a little interested in that. But another guy I want to talk about here is Rudy Gay, who I think may actually get a little bit of extra time. But again, they're not on any kind of back-to-back. We always worry about his sort of implicit minute restrictions. But if Jabari Parker gets going, he's the guy who's going to get the call there. 5,200 on DK is fine. I don't mind some exposure. But 4,900 on FanDuel, I'll save $100 and play him over Larry Nance. All
these guys are fairly priced, but what's interesting is that price points and salaries, they don't matter when it comes to SuperDraft. For all of you in here, the future of daily fantasy sports has arrived. Experience.
That was a strong segue. The segue game is strong with this one. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to.
Man, I was in the zone just now, but experience SuperDraft's exclusive game mode multiplier. Say goodbye to those salary restrictions and hello to the lineup freedom. Use your fantasy sports knowledge to draft any player you want and build your own dream team. Countless lineup possibilities let you experience daily fantasy sports the way you want. SuperDraft offers contests for the NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL, and PGA, so you can enjoy the best of DFS all year long. If you're looking to sign up for SuperDraft, use the promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO. And you can claim your free $20 in super cash with your first deposit of $100 or more. Download the app today in the App Store or play at superdraft.io. No limits, more winning. All right, last three games.
If you don't mind, I'm going to step ahead and talk about a couple of guys in those last few games because we're 20 minutes to lock, and I want people to be able to do something with the crap that comes out of my mouth. And if, like, the last game we're going to get to at 6:51, that's not going to help anyone. So real quick, almost certainly it's going to be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Chris Paul have a very big game tonight. As something I've talked about this whole year, and that's while I am not particularly enjoyable of the matchup with Orlando, who is an excellent defense and plays quite slowly, they really football, which I know you do some shows for. There's a lot to talk about run funnel and pass funnel defenses. This is a guard funnel defense. Teams are just going to have trouble getting it done down low against this Orlando team, which has really numerous outstanding defenders, from Vooch to John Isaac to Aaron Gordon, who's well above average, and a couple of the guys they're playing up top, especially now that they've pulled DJ Augustine out and have Markelle Fultz starting for this team. I think you get some ceiling games, and we've seen this happen at least twice already this year. We saw Trae Young go in there, and he was very low owned. Because, it's Orlando. It's a terrible matchup. And Trae Young put up, 65 in that game when he was like 4% owned. That reminds me very much of this conversation. Thankfully, they have priced Chris Paul up for no good reason. but he went from on FanDuel, he went from 7Ks back up to 7.4 or 7.5 or something. On DK, he's continued to come down, but thankfully they brought Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Is still too cheap at 7K. Shai in a neutral matchup should be over 8K right now as he is. Again, he had one somewhat poor game, but his worst game was 28. 28, 33, 53, 40, 40, 42. That's pretty good for 7K. And, you know, his previous high for shots this season is 23. I think he beats that tonight. I think there's a chance of a monster Shai Gilgeous-Alexander game. And he's not expected to be owned like at all. I think at 8.3 on FanDuel, he's a perfectly compelling shooting guard play at a contentious position where he could easily be the top scorer in that position. And at 7K on DraftKings, I'm legit excited to roster him. So Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and by extension, Chris Paul, you know, is going to get it done at a price tag of 6,600 one of these nights. He did not literally have a leg amputated at the leg of last season. He's not this bad. I would rather go with either of those guys before I went to, say, Danilo Gallinari, although he is well priced and positioned on FanDuel. I imagine I would end up over the field there. I've always been a big Gallinari fan. There are injury issues at center. There's more time of him playing down low. This is a little cheap for a guy who actually does carry a decent ceiling. Not a tremendous game environment whatsoever, but I really like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Both sites, but especially DK at 7,000. One of my favorite plays.
If Adams was out, I really did like Vucevic in this spot. However, though, with Adams in, it's a little bit more of a tougher matchup for him. But what about Aaron Gordon? Is there any love for him? Because I mean, he's priced at 6,400 on FanDuel,
59 on DK,
and 59 on DK. So I mean, at these price points, we know what he's capable of. And I mean, he's definitely someone who can shoot as well and crash the board. So any love for Aaron Gordon here?
A couple other things from this game real quick then. Steven Adams at 5,800 is pretty interesting for me. I'd have some GPP exposure. It's not a great game, not a super fantasy guy. 5,800 is a price and low enough, and he's going to be 1.5% owned or something, or 3% owned maybe he'll get up to, but I'd have some interest in 3% owned Steven Adams in a game that could turn into a bit of a scrum. I'd have some interest in still on DraftKings at $4,400 Nerlens Noel. I mean, he's really never that bad a play. He generally gets you, 20 in the 16 minutes anyway. It's really not crazy to imagine a universe in which Steven Adams, coming back from being hurt, plays 28 minutes and Nerlens plays 20. And I'd want some Nerlens Noel, 4,400 for 20 minutes. Not a ton of either of these guys, but certainly something worth thinking about there. And Aaron Gordon is a difficult to predict guy and isn't not just from my personal experience, but statistically there are teams he's been decent against and players he's been decent against, but he's generally hard to predict. But that number keeps coming down, and we've seen ceiling games out of him before. So this certainly on a slate where there is a lot of muck to go around and a lot of surety, and the amount of value we can be really safe on isn't there. That firing 5,900 at somebody like Aaron Gordon and thinking this is the spot where he gets 40 doesn't strike me as crazy. But again, it's dicey. This is Fultz too deserves a specific mention. He's I have him for 27 minutes now. He's gotten the start here. I expect this game to stay close. So I'm kind of interested in Markelle Fultz on DK. I think especially where he's better priced. I think he's 4K on the nose. He's shooting guard eligible too. I'd have some shares of Markelle Fultz.
Yeah, I was gonna mention him if you didn't. 4,000 on DK, 47 on FanDuel starting. I have him around the same spot too, 26 minutes. So I mean, for him, if he's able to do what he kind of has done the last few games, now seeing an increase on the floor and starting. I mean, earlier in the year he had about a 25, 24 usage rate. So I mean, if that's something that we can see with him starting, I don't mind that at all.
Yeah, it's one of the and I should say specifically, I am pretty nervous about Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and so this plays into that's one of the guys where if I can come up with a few extra $100, I'd like to try to get away. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope he has this year. I want to say the first game of this year, KCP played 28 minutes and scored 8 fantasy points or something like. This is a guy who can really disappear. Now, thankfully, all this other value opening up, his ownership has dropped to now we have him about 20%. Yeah, I'd still try to find a way. I'd rather run Jakar Sampson. I would rather run a couple of the other guys we talked to at $3,200 if I didn't have the extra money. So And I'd certainly rather, if I could possibly find, $100 for Jeremy Grant if I had to, or $600, as we're mentioning, for Markelle Fultz. I would much rather play some of the other value plays. It's a good matchup, but if he's popular, and again, moving into the starting lineup means you spend more time along Anthony Davis and LeBron, who tend to eat 70% of the usage. So you're really asking for a few things to break your way. So I would try to move away from that if I could.
Well, let's go into that game because that's the next one. Lakers and Bulls, 216 over under. Lakers 7-point favorites. With KCP, I agree with you 100%. The two games that he, I guess, hit above value, they both weren't on the floor, and James and Davis. And so it's very rare that you're going to get that situation where they're both not on the floor because, when they're on the floor, a majority of the usage is going to them. And so he's not the first, second, nor is he probably the third option in this offense. It's really tough to have him. I think I might even probably would want Kevin Huerter over him just because you're going to get the minutes on him. But he's also someone who can shoot, and they do rely on him to score at times. So with Collins out, I think that gives him a bump as well with scoring opportunities and Trae Young hitting him in the corner or somewhere in the 3 area.
Sure. I'd much rather play Kevin Huerter. I think he is well more expensive. I could be wrong there when we're talking about KCP. Is Huerter still like 3,400 on DK? I thought that number had come up. Otherwise, that's not even close for me how I have those guys projected.
So he's 4,100 on DK. Yeah,
okay.
And Pope's 34.
Yeah, no. So I'm absolutely Huerter. I raw points actually like a little bit better than Fultz, but absolutely. I'm a fan of getting same idea that $600 or $700 to play them, or Goga or Alex Len, or so. Unless you really have a lineup you love and need that $600 to go down to KCP, I would try to play other guys. And even if I went down that low, I would try to play Jakar Sampsons or someone else before I played KCP. If he's going to be 20% on, that's just too much for me. I like matchup with the Bulls. I get it, but yeah, it's still KCP.
So let's get into Davis and James. For me, they're the two highest ceiling players on this slate. I guess the real question is if you are in confliction of wanting to roster both of them or one of them, or what is the plan of attack, or I guess what is the most optimal plan of attack with David and James tonight?
Again, this is rounding because it's a complicated question that sort of gets turned into a binary here. But I think in a vacuum, I would generally be playing both on DraftKings and just Anthony Davis on FanDuel, based on how they're priced and the various positional nuances that affect your ability to get them in there. There's some great value on DraftKings, so getting them in there isn't tough with all the guys we've mentioned. And Otto Porter, who we hadn't mentioned yet, who is $4,300, and I expect to be fine and play 30 minutes tonight, and that's just too cheap for Otto Porter, and lets you stack the game a little bit. There's just they're just too cheap on DraftKings. I don't know how to put it better than that. The super studs have been too cheap all year, from Harden to these guys to they have truncated the curve at the top, which is actually something that FanDuel did for many years, where no one could cost more than $9,900. I don't know how many old folks in the room remember this, but 4 or 5 years ago, they just capped the salary at $9,900, and as the NBA got faster and various team things happened, there were guys you just had to windmill slam at 99. Like LeBron was playing, there was 1 year you couldn't not roster him because he was capped at 9,900, and in a vacuum his price should have been 11,800. And it's a similar situation on DK right now, where it's really hard to get away from those guys against the Bulls. Maybe one of them gets 100, so the other one only gets 45, and you don't want him. Okay, maybe more likely Davis going to his hometown. If anyone doesn't know, born and raised Chicago, Illinois, Chi-town. What a town. But I generally like his game a little bit better. I generally like his matchup a little bit better. Ain't nobody there going to be stopping Anthony Davis if he decides he wants to get 100. So, and, based on price and position on FanDuel, he also makes a little more sense for me. But in a vacuum, I really like them both. FanDuel, you get to, quite possibly roster the highest scoring small forward in LeBron by 21 points. That'll win you some tournaments. But, yeah, in order of preference, it would be Davis over LeBron, both sites. DK LeBron still in like my top overall 3 plays on the site. So they're going to be popular. They should be popular. More value has opened up. Really no super reason to get away. I'm curious what we have them actually projected at. I'll spoil some more projections here. On DK, we have LeBron higher than Davis. Sacrilege. We have them within 0.2% of each other. They are both cusping 37%. We had an update here. Since then, they're both closer to 36% now. Davis a little higher now. See? There you go. I infected the internet with my zeitgeist that quick. I'd have more than that of both of them. I don't think it's a requirement. I don't think you necessarily need to have one, but then you're building a blowout lineup and throw some Chris Dunn value in there or some Ryan Arcidiacono or Kobe White actually would be the correct answer to that question. Throw some Kobe White in there and play Brogdon and Aldridge and Walker and Love and all these other 8 and 9K guys. That's a perfectly valid lineup if you think this game absolutely goes to crap. But on the face of things, I would want more than those 37-38% numbers.
Anyone else in this game before we go into the last game?
I prefer Zach LaVine pretty significantly, especially with the absence of AB. Not that he's a shadow of what he used to be, but there's a tier down there to KCP. I prefer Zach LaVine to Lauri Markkanen. Now, obviously, the price on DK for Lauri Markkanen makes him perfectly compelling in tournaments. Even in a tough matchup, slow matchup, guy can get on top of 6,200, obviously. But prefer Zach LaVine if I'm going to go there. Sato is interesting as a price option. Carter's a little more than I want to spend. Otto Porter on DK especially, though again on FanDuel positionally, perfectly good. And on DK, I'm a huge fan of Otto Porter, and he's not coming up as terribly owned. We have Otto Porter at 8%. He's one of my favorite value plays. I'd have to look at it for a while. He would quantify less than Len or Goga for me, but he'd be a little better than Fultz and a couple other guys we talked about. So I like Otto Porter at 4,300 quite a bit. If he's going to be 8% owned, I'd be pretty happy having double that.
All right, our last game, Heat at Nuggets. Denver 4.5-point favorites, 211.5 over under. Jokic, it's I guess Adam brought up a lot of great points earlier in the show, and there were some things on Twitter today. I don't know if you saw, but about the rotations of how Jokic was playing on offense, and finally what we saw, I guess, against Orlando in the second half, the last game, was he was creating space and getting one-on-one opportunities and allowing himself to put him in position to be able to shoot and be able to have drives that were effective to the lane. So still there's a little bit of concern, with what we've seen as far as kind of just how he's been utilized in the offense. Nothing's changed as far as the rotation or anyone on this team as far as the lineup construction. But with Jokic here, he's priced a little bit low now. And I feel like this is the time where you got to buy.
Yeah, especially FanDuel, where 9,200 is the equivalent of 10K or so on DK, where you attempt to equate those currencies. That price is incredibly, incredibly low. I'm curious if you can look what our ownership is for him there. He is reduced to 17% on DK, and there's no great reason not to go there. But he's obviously in the midst of one of those doldrum things he does. But outside of that, it's an absolutely fine spot. It's a big pace-up spot for them. Miami is moving quite a bit, and I expect that to continue this entire year. But yeah, Jokic is where you should start with this team. I'm a fan of playing Jokic. I'm a fan of trying to play someone else on this team if you don't play Jokic. Miami is the sticky spot. But yeah, when you're looking at this Denver team, it's tough to know what to say because it's a really difficult to predict circumstance. I'm curious if against what's been a pretty big front court, if you get a Millsap game or if you get a Jeremy Grant game, which has been sort of a binary so far, or if you get the Mason Plumlee game where he picks up a bigger role and all those guys are interested and got relevant ranks for me. We obviously don't know the news on Will Barton. If Will Barton is playing, he would pretty quickly become my favorite guy on this team if we knew that he was starting and didn't have a restriction. So again, that's pretty unlikely, but I like playing Jokic as the first guy I'm interested in on this team. I like playing Murray if I'm not playing Jokic. I think it's more negative than positive correlation when you're looking at those two guys. But I'm fine with this game coming up last, because if you were gonna skip a game, this is a fine one to skip. Like I don't have a big problem if you don't end up with someone in this game, because Denver is A, really difficult to project, and B, rarely gets giant outlier performances out of anyone but Jokic, and he's super expensive. So even if Jokic gets there and gets 60, he could get exceeded by both Brow and LeBron anyway. So yeah, I'm fine if you end up with someone there. But Miami, I'm just terrified of what's going to happen to the rotation. I don't have the first clue. Like, I've been talking about this the entire year, where now all of a sudden everyone is healthy for this team, and we expect that both Justice Winslow and Derek Jones Jr. are going to warm up with the intention of playing. I don't know who's playing. I really don't know how to project the minutes for this team, because they're finally all healthy. Probably Waiters doesn't play again. Probably James Johnson goes back out of the rotation. But you're still dealing with the wings of, Butler, Winslow, Hero, Nund and Dragic to a certain extent end up swapping time with those guys. Just Duncan Robinson, who had started and played really well 2 games in a row. It's supposed to be the game before that where he played a minute. I just no idea what's gonna go. And they're in a horrific matchup. So, and they're on the road in Denver. Like, it's all kinds of squishy as hell there. So, I still gave A GPP rankings to the guys I think most likely put up superlative performances, which would be Butler and Adebayo, who can just still get there, and the 2 guys whose minutes is probably most secure, and the guy who's most underpriced, which would still be Kendrick Nunn, who, had a bad game. There was some foul trouble. It was a blowout on that truly wretched Sunday we just had. But it's a team I'm very concerned with.
Any value plays before we head out of this game?
No,
that maybe someone should consider.
I think we're about 20 seconds from lock, but no, there's not really value plays from this game you should consider, unless you can take shots. Barton isn't a value play anymore, and you can take shots on some of the other guys on Denver, your Monty Morrising or Malik Beasley, but those guys are going to play 12 minutes unless there's a blowout. So I don't really want to go there. So no, there's not really value shots I want to take on this game. There's just better value that's still going to be 8, 5, 10% owned in other games. This would be pretty far down the list of things I'd want to take a shot at.
All right. Well, that's it. We're locked.
We are home.
I'm curious to see some of the percentages right now.
Yeah, I'll pull them up. I'll pull them up. You sell something or vamp. I had some funny jokes for our first show together. We didn't get time, so here's my jokes in my notes. I'm really excited to finally be able to do a show with Chris. He and I have a lot of experiences in common. We've both lived a life where we know what it's like to be only valued for our looks, and that life isn't just about being really, really, really ridiculously good looking. So I have that whole Zoolander thing here.
Amazing. Oh my God, you did not drop the Zoolander thing. That's great.
And then there's finally getting to do a show with Chris. It's like Fleetwood Mac. Everybody gets paired together eventually. That might be too old for you.
I know who Fleetwood Mac is.
Yeah, but like everyone in the band at some point banged everyone in the band of the opposite gender, and maybe not even with that restriction. Like, it was just, they really, like, it was a whole thing. So those were
love that.
There might have been some other jokes, but those were the 2 on the top. All right, let's see if we can find some ownership. I gotta log into somebody. Are you aware that I am not allowed to legally play DFS? Are you?
No, I did not. I did not know that. But I have some ownership. I'm in a bigger tournament tonight. But there's a 1650 on FanDuel, and so Brogdon is 56% owned.
Wow.
Yeah, and Thies is 35. Marcus Smart is 40. Cheaty is 3
Tice at 35 surprises me a lot. Like Tyson, because that's non-Brogdon, non-Anthony Davis ownership, who I would have thought got. But it's gonna be really. I'm downloading Go ahead and continue. I'm gonna download the biggest tournament I can find.
Yeah. It seems as if the whole entire Boston Celtics team is just very highly owned.
They're playing a shit defense.
Yeah.
It's slow, but it's still a crap defense, and they're all cheap. And without Jaylen Brown, they all get a little bit of a boost. So they're all good to very good. None of them struck me as like brilliant, but they're all good to very good.
Kemba is 50%. Bridges 25. Nance 12. Jakar Sampson is 5. Rozier is 10. So these are just the guys that are showing up right now, but for the first 2 games. Yeah, Leaf is 15.
The largest tournament on DK. Leaf is 15.
Mm-hmm.
Christ, will people learn? Was he absolute bit? Because he's $5,000 on DK. I did not rank him. With both of them out, I considered putting Leaf back in. I did not. I do not want any shares in 150 on DraftKings. I have a long-standing bias against DJ Leaf, who
So you want to hear my team that I went with?
Do it.
Because
I'm excited.
all right, so
I have a placeholder. I'll give you my team. Hold on, I have a.
okay.
I can't legally enter it, but I created a. All right, I have my placeholder. Go ahead. We'll go position by position. Who you got at point guard?
Okay, at point guard, Murray and Fultz.
I have Murray and Brogdon. Okay, so
okay.
Right on one.
Shooting guard, I went with Marcus Smart and DeMar DeRozan.
I have Marcus Smart and $8,300 Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
All right, small forward, I went with Cheedy and Otto Porter.
All right, I have Rudy Gay and Cam Reddish. But
power forward, I went with Anthony Davis and Jabari Parker.
Same.
And then center, I went with Jokic.
Yeah, and center, I have Alex Len. So there you go.
Okay.
Which again, several people send me tweets every day. Like, I think I've guessed your lineup based on, which is always fun for me. And certainly Len, Davis, Parker, I think I made pretty clear during the show. Brogdon too, I think was pretty clear. So there were only about 5 you had to guess to figure out.
Yeah, Len and Jokic were my. It was going back and forth. Did I want to pay down at center and then maybe pay up and get LeBron? It was just I just went with Jokic.
Yeah, because absolutely nothing. What percentage was Jokic? Oh, we don't know Jokic.
We don't know yet. Yeah.
What a dumb question.
Yeah.
DK, I had just gotten it. Here it is. Here it is. Number 1 owned Goga, 49% on DraftKings. So yes, whatever Alex Len is, presuming it's not 30, which it's not going to be, I'm going to like that more than 49% Goga. They actually project really similarly to me. Minutes, points totals, foul trouble, like they actually have very similar lines to me. Goga, slightly better game. Goga, slightly better matchup. Len, slightly better game. Len, slightly injured. But they're both, trying to hopefully get out there 28, 29 minutes for their team. Number of ways they get reduced. Very similar for me. Number 2, Malcolm Brogdon, 36.5%. Probably want a little more, but that's healthy. Number 3, Jeremy Lamb, 34%. That's about where that should be. Maybe even a little less for me. That's a big number, but 6,100 was, well too cheap. Kevin Love, 24. That's fine. Kemba Walker, 23. That's fine. Gordon Hayward, 15. That's fine. Marcus Smart, 10.4. Want a little more than that on DK. I like me some Marcus Smart. Tristan Thompson, 8.9. I'd want more than that. Jason Tatum, 8.6. I'd want more than that. I mean, there's a. I mean, you can get, like we were talking about, various guys with Mike. You're just not gonna get 55 out of Tristan Thompson. You can get 55 out of Jason Tatum. Like, that can happen tonight. That's I don't know what the odds are. That the odds of Tristan Thompson getting a number that starts with 50 tonight are probably in the 3% range, if I had to guess. They're in the low single-digit percentages. The odds for Jason Tatum are 10. I mean, like, there's a real number chance. Anyway, Daniel Tice, 8.6, but again, that's the the larger DraftKings price. Jakar Sampson, 8.5. TJ Warren, 8.2. Devontae Graham, 6.9. Miles Bridges, 6. Dwayne Bacon, 5.7. Terry Rozier, 5.5. TJ Lee, 4.4. Justin Holiday, 4.14. I did rank him. He's a guy who should pick up some real time here in any one of many places I'd have gone over. KCP or TJ Lee for. Anyhow, PJ Washington, 3.13. Yeah, that guy's price has to come back down. Colin Sexton, 2.6. All right. I might want more. 2.6. Marvin Williams, 2. Larry Nance on DK, 1.3. What did he end up on FanDuel? Because
he was, in the big tournament, he was 15%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a little more reasonable that he got brought down. And then other guys, and someone probably played themselves. I'm looking. Domantas Sabonis, 0.1%. Congratulations. You played yourself. There's Miles Turner, 0.02. Jaylen Brown, 0.01. Enes Kanter, 0.01. You all played yourselves. Victor Oladipo, 0.00. That one was probably unintentional. I think we have a good chance.
31% went Goga in the big one.
At 5,300.
Yeah.
Great. I mean, it's maybe my... maybe my... I guess I honestly think it really comes. I have him and Alex Len projected almost identically. I'd have no interest in spending $1,000 more for a triply owned Goga over Alex Len on FanDuel. But I think the thing is, Alex Len has kicked DFS players in the balls repeatedly. Like, it's just happened again and again and again. And we've seen this doesn't work out. And Goga in his 2-game career has been very productive in those 2 games. And so if people are just like, oh, I'll go with that guy. And that to some sense, some degree makes sense. But I would. We'll see how it goes. One of the worst things about our job, is that I get done with shows and I'm like, great, My reputation is hanging on Alex Len. How could that possibly go wrong?
Well, I think that's it, man. I'm ready for a good night, man. That was a good show. I appreciate you doing the show with me.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for doing the show with me. Thanks for coming on.
No problem, man. Well, listen, guys, we appreciate you. Thank you for giving us a thumbs up. Continue to support, subscribe. And you guys, good luck tonight. Hopefully we see some feel-good stories tomorrow. Eddie, thanks again for Yahoo, Awesemo, SuperDraft. Everyone, thank you. Have a good night.